in the last several years, we've seen major moves from companies say that a degree is actually not as important as it once was.
What would you do if you would start today from the zero?
If I see people zoom by me in their careers, I'm like, and if I had a hand in that, I feel just as good as they must feel about being there. You know what I mean?
All right, folks, we're live. We are in LinkedIn streaming and Facebook streaming. And everyone who just joined to us, thank you very much. I want to introduce all of us. This is a morning podcast with Adil Mansour and Evgeny Kim. And we have a special guest here, Jeffrey Strauss. Jeffrey, he's a director of IT operations at Docker recently, but he has a very interesting background and journey. So today, we're going to talk about 0 to 1 concept of career. And the most important part that we all been in the beginning. And now you have this lucrative career path, and everybody like myself are very curious how this path did go. What was the obstacles? And you have very impressive resume. How did you get there, right? And folks, we already launched our newsletter, 0 to 1. Please subscribe. We posting there interesting stories about startups, founders, people who had this 0 to 1 concept. All right, Jeffrey, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to our show. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, our favorite question.
Thank you, Evgeny. It's very exciting to be here. Thank you both so much. Well, I'm Jeff. I'm the director of IT at Docker. I've been there for just under a year now. Previously, I led the program management office at Snap. I was there for a little over a year. Prior to that, I was a manager in the Netflix Technology Services group at Netflix. And then I have a couple of other past ones as well. I've been jumping around in tech for a while. My career started off as a very technical. I was, like most people, I was an individual contributor on a team. Mm-hmm. I started off doing systems engineering, sys administration, things like that. Mm-hmm. And then later on, probably about 10 or so years ago, I moved into the team leadership position. That was when I was at Twitter. That wasn't my official title. My official title was a senior client engineer. Mm-hmm. But I wrote some tools for a couple of different teams, and I was essentially the lead on those tools. So I was a highest escalation point. And that was my foray into what has become my passion over the last decade, which is leadership, people management and leadership. Mm-hmm. I've led technical teams for the last several years, or actually for the entire time I've been in leadership, they've been technical teams. But I really, really enjoy the challenge and the intricacies of people management and leading teams of people. I find that to be really fascinating, and it's become a real passion of mine.
All right, awesome. I also interested in how to actually get into tech. Like, did you go to school?
I did not. So I got into tech like many people my age, which nobody's going to find our age. Young, so young, with a computer at home. I had a computer at home. I spent a lot of time in front of my computer. Much at that age when parents can't tell the future, right. It's much to your parents' chagrin that their child is spending every waking hour in front of a computer. But it turned out to be pretty okay, Mom and Dad. So that's essentially how I got into it.
Mine too, right?
Yeah. I think the same for many people. We're doing okay.
Too much on the screen.
Too much on the screen. Both of us are wearing glasses. I don't know about you. Contacts?
I'm nearsighted. It's not as bad as you two.
Take it easy. So that's how it started off. I took a couple computer science classes. Even in high school, I was very lucky that in high school, right. In the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a computer science class, like Pascal and BASIC. And so, so I was interested, from that aspect as well. And it just sort of naturally progressed into my first tech job, which I actually got at 17 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I got it actually through a friend of mine, Rob. He was working at this company. It's no longer there. It was called DNA Studio. It was like a website design and sort of like an online marketing company in Beverly Hills. And he was working there through another circumstance. He ended up working in the IT department there. And through a series of conversations, he got me a job there as well. I ended up getting a job there. And so that was, good friend, right? Yeah, great friend. Yeah. And so, I had technical chops even at that age, but it was, it wasn't anywhere near the level of professionalism that I think we all have today. It was sort of like, you're a kid and you know a lot about computers, right? And so they were like, okay, yeah, we'll hire you onto the IT team. You know a lot about computers. You can fix computers. You've built computers, that kind of thing. So I got a job at DNA, and I was there for a couple of years on and off. And that was really my foray into the tech world. I just started there, and then, next job was, okay, cool. I think I like this sort of sysadmin, sysengineering role that I'm in. I started doing a little bit of automation at that time. I was writing a couple of shell scripts to do things. And I was like, oh, this is really fascinating. And I just sort of kept it up. And it just went from, one job, and I was like, oh, there's a sysadmin job on Craigslist I'm really interested in. So I'll apply to that. And I applied to a bunch of those, and I got one. And then that was, learned a little bit more on the job, and then went from there and then on. Yeah.
Very, very interesting, and just also nostalgia. Remember building operating systems from source? I think Debian.
Debian.
Yeah. Debian was my first one. It's and it starts with curiosity a lot of times.
Yeah. My first Linux flavor that I ever built was Slackware. I don't know if people even remember Slackware, but Slackware Linux, I mean, it's been probably defunct now for so long. I think they came out with another version a couple years ago out of nowhere. But yeah, if anybody out there remembers Slackware, that was my first distribution.
Question. So you got, actually this story, I heard this story many times, right? When a kid, 17, 18 years old, and he may not have a college degree, but at that time, maybe industry was more forgiving, and it was maybe easy. Is it a myth? Was it easier back then to get into the tech without a degree? What do you think?
That's a really good question. It's a good question, and I will answer it directly, but it's a good question because in the last several years, we've seen major moves from companies say that a degree is actually not as important as it once was. I think Apple very famously several years back said for software engineers, we're no longer requiring a college degree.
Yeah.
But that was more recent. That was within the last 10 years or something like that, maybe 5-7 years. I think back then to get into the field was probably a little bit harder than it might be now, actually, without a degree. And I'll tell you why I think that. Because I think people realize now, I think it's more broadly realized that in today's day and age, I mean, everybody has a piece of tech.
Right.
Everybody. I go to a restaurant and I look over and parents are giving their 2-year-olds the iPad to keep them busy. You know what I mean? So people are growing up with technology.
Yeah.
The onboarding experience for new hires 10 to 12 years ago is actually quite different than it is today. Just from the perspective that new hires don't need as much hand-holding for stuff, right? They're familiar with, okay, what's single sign-on? Oh, I'm familiar with that, right? How do I navigate the intricacies of a browser? Oh, okay, I'm familiar with that, right? Multiple profiles on a browser, different extensions, things like that. Yeah. Just talking about the browser itself, right?
Yeah.
People are familiar with that nowadays.
Right.
Whereas prior, it was a little bit, it wasn't quite as easy as those technologies were emerging in that software. So to answer your question directly, I think that probably back then it may have been a little bit more difficult because there wasn't, a degree was always a way to prove your mettle. You know what I mean? And nowadays I think it's a little bit more common that yeah, you grow up with technology. People know how to use tech, and I think it's a little bit might be a little bit easier to sort of like slip in my opinion. And I'll share this if I may. Can I share one more anecdote? I think one thing that is easier today, for sure, than it was back then, was moving into sort of like a leadership position as on a team, on a technical team. I think back then you really had to have like people were like looking for either a CS degree or like an information systems degree or business systems degree, something like that, to move into a leadership role, like a tech lead or even like a manager position. But nowadays, I don't think that that's the case. I think a lot of people rise to those levels because they have the technical chops and they've also been at a position for a while, and it's like it's less dependent on the formal education.
Yeah, no, it's very true. Also here at Chow Now, where I work currently, we removed that unless there is a very, very specific, very, very good reason to have something like that, and it's not there. I don't even know if people notice it anymore, but it's simply not there. It's not in any of our like evaluation criteria and all of that, because especially in tech, it's less and less important. But also I think what's changed, like interviews have changed big time from back then. Now they're more skills focused. Before you were getting in there, with your resume, people would ask you random questions from your resume. Now hiring process is a lot more focused around, okay, what skills do they need to be successful? Let's get them in the job description. Then let's make sure as we go through the interview process, whether it's those specific skills or values or leadership, we really focus in on those questions, and how they perform on those questions is how we decide to move forward or not. So it's big change, I think, in that direction as well. Then that's where the value was, like, oh, you have a degree, okay, well, let's have these random questions. You do well with random questions. You have the requisite degree. You're hired.
Right. I think I've heard this a long time ago, so I can't claim ownership of this, and I'm sure it's widely known, but I think it's very poignant, which is I think the real value of a degree in our field is that it shows that people can work to deadlines, work on teams, they can communicate effectively, right? They can stick something out because like you've done the, however many years you have the degree, like you accomplished it, right? I think it speaks more to those skills than necessarily the competency for the job itself. And what I've found personally through interviewing members of teams that I have managed has been that a lot of times the skills that I want to have on my team are not reflected in a resume at all. They're just not there. Like the resume has great sort of like technical chops, but I always say I hire candidates for attitude and aptitude.
Yeah.
That's what I like to say.
That's right.
And I think that some of the skills that contribute to highly effective teams, they don't show up on a resume. You really have to tease those out through conversation, through interesting interview strategies and techniques to try to get that information out. Because, they say at one of my previous jobs, they say this at Netflix, we don't hire brilliant jerks. And I totally agree. I think you can have, a stellar resume, but be like a person I really don't want to spend any time with. And I don't want that kind of person on a team,
No way. The other kind of interesting thing around this, so as shifting gears a little bit, right? You're obviously a senior, very senior leader. How do you see, like, for today, somebody who's not, maybe it's a three-parter. One is tell us a little bit, because I think this is something we haven't covered in our podcast. Tell us a little bit about like IT engineering, IT operations. And then if somebody's not in IT engineering operations today and they're interested, how do they get started? And third part, it could be a non-traditional background or somebody who's a recent CS or IT engineering grad. I think that would be really valuable, because maybe this is my bias, maybe because, I just don't see enough information on this path compared to, there's a lot of information on development path. There's a lot of information UI, UX path. There's a lot of information on even product now in the last couple of years. But I see that path like little underserved. What are your thoughts?
I think that's a really good observation. I was just thinking about how the amount of times I've seen on LinkedIn those sort of flow charts for like security engineering and all these different things. You're right, but like IT, there's not a lot of that. That's so true. Okay, I'll go back to the beginning of your question a little bit. IT ops and IT engineering. Just a little bit about that field. Yeah, essentially, from a very high level, what that field is running systems, tools, platforms that enable the business in a number of different ways. So either, collaboration tools and productivity tools like, your instant messaging tools, your email, sharing and collaborating with different files, just sort of like enabling communication. That's like the very high level. The way that I describe it to my team is, and I think this might be a shift of traditional IT, especially in the past, is the things that we do, we don't want to be gatekeepers, we want to be doormen, right? And so it's funny because one of my teammates said that they perform the same function. They open and close doors, both of them. But the mentality that it evokes is a gatekeeper keeps things shut, whereas a doorman opens things, right? So we want to enable productivity. My mom says this a lot. She goes, we don't say no, we say no problem. So that's the phrase that we want to use on my team. Yeah. So I say that a lot with my team as well. But essentially what the field is providing services and capabilities to businesses to enable the productivity of different units within that organization in whatever way is necessary. I think a lot of things fall to IT that maybe should be handled elsewhere. And I think that's just a consequence of like, we don't really know where this goes. IT, they're like computer people and like you're doing a tech thing. So that goes to them. And that's fine. It's par for the course. But broadly, it's about business enablement and running, ensuring that the systems that we run and that we create and that we maintain enable productivity for the business so we can see the business succeed and thrive and move at the scale and pace that's necessary. That's essentially what it is. You asked another question, which was
how to get into
it.
Yeah. And actually, there is a several part of this question because how you can get into for 17, 20 years old folks who can attend to the college, may not. There's a lot of interest between folks who are over 30, over 40.
Yeah.
Is it still possible?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or it is a made for?
Yeah. That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think it is possible. I think the answer, I hope this isn't like a too philosophical or like esoteric answer, but I think the answer has two perspectives. One is the perspective of the applicant. So I think that from the applicant's perspective, it's absolutely possible. And today more than ever before, there are free courses and free, certification tracks and stuff that you can get some chops, right? Mm-hmm. Google is a famous one. I ask everybody on my team to go get the Google Workspace certification, right? There are a bunch of those that are free. Google has a Python course. I think it's actually on a paid platform, but you could sign up for that platform for free for a month or something like that.
And it's cheap. I think there's like
something like that. I think it's on Coursera. Yeah, I think it's on Coursera. I encourage people to do those, right? Especially if they don't have a lot of experience. Those things take you from 0 to 1, right?
Yep.
And I think they're really good. They're a great foundation. And the tip that I would give to individuals who are looking to break into the industry, regardless of what age you are, is find something that differentiates your skill set. Because if you're a good troubleshooter, you also have to be a very strong communicator. I would say communication is a really strong skill as well, because there are a lot of people in the tech field, it's still pervasive today, where communication is not a strength. Yeah. And I think if you're going to be, one of the characteristics of high performing teams is strong emotional intelligence. And one of the foundations of that is how you communicate interpersonally. So I think you have to be a strong communicator. And there are ways to improve that as well. But from a skill set perspective, I think building a basic foundation and then finding a way to differentiate yourself is a really great foot in the door. And one way that I strongly encourage the teams that I manage to differentiate themselves in IT specifically is by learning automation of some sort. I think a lot of traditional IT teams don't have automation capabilities on them, but they would do so well to have them. And so I coach every member of every team I ever manage, learn some automation, because it will either help you excel in your IT career, but it will also enable you to branch out into other areas of tech if you start to develop this skill set. And I've seen that happen on teams that I've managed. I've managed at least 2 or 3 people who have taken their automation skills and moved from IT to be like SREs or software engineers, or moving on to other roles within the tech space that they're working in, purely by virtue of that differentiation. So I think that's a really critical step if you're looking to break into the industry.
What would you do if you would start today from the zero? You mentioned about automation.
Okay.
Yeah. What would be like your roadmap? Okay.
I think about, that's a really good question. I think about that a lot because I think in a lot of ways I am at zero, and I like to keep like a zero mentality.
Yeah.
So I literally start from the basics. I say, like, I think what is is it the Dunning? It's not Dunning-Kruger, is it? Where it's it's like conscious incompetence, unconscious incompetence. You know that scale that I'm talking about?
Right.
I can't remember if that's Dunning-Kruger or if that's something else. I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah, it's very famous chart.
Yeah.
Like when unconscious incompetence, then you progress to competence.
Yeah, you progress from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. So like you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
Then you learn a little bit and then you're like, oh, I don't know a lot, right? You know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And then you move into sort of, you move up the levels to conscious competence where you're like, oh, I know everything. I would say for me, if in this field, I would literally start from like, you know what? Here's what I would do, actually. I'll tell you. The first thing I would start with is assessing the landscape. I would go out there and like use a tool like LinkedIn and see what people are looking for, right? I would go and say, this is the job that I want. Let me go search for a job title that I'm interested in, and let me look at the JD. Let me look at the job description and see what kinds of skills they're looking for. What don't I have? And I'll start there. I'll tell one quick anecdote. I remember years ago, this was like in the early 2010s, I was working at a high school and I went to interview at Google. And I made it to their final interview round. They flew me up to Mountain View and I was one of 2 finalists. I didn't get the job, but I'll tell you, I learned more from not getting that job than I think I did from getting that job. Reason being, I remember a lot of the questions that I was asked that I had no idea how to answer. And then I went back to LA afterwards and I was like, you know what? I got to start learning about that. And so I would just look stuff up. So that's where I would start, is like assess where you want to be. And you can use tools like LinkedIn and then see these skills that you want to achieve. And then, there are ways online where you could go either buy a book or get a course or do something, set yourself up a little lab at home. There's like virtual machines if you want 10 computers and you can't have 10 physical machines.
Yeah.
So that's how I would probably start.
Yeah.
The really interesting part of that, I think, and this is something one of my former coworkers at Yacht, he's in product management at Instagram now. Something he said to me a long while ago, and it took me a long time to really understand what he meant. And it was really around that idea, what's the G.I. Joe or the Captain Planet, right? Knowing is half the battle. If you can figure out if you can figure out where you want to be, that's like really the half the battle, like figuring that out. Sometimes people are just, hey, I want to, and it's fantastic. It's a good start. Like, hey, I want to move from this industry to tech, which is great. But start to really figure out what's important. Because at the time, I think we had this, me and him were having this conversation maybe like 10 years ago. And I didn't get what he meant. And now like that resonates, and you see that drive in. Maybe drive is not the word. Maybe you see that in people early on. You can see like they've really narrowed in what what they're looking for, and then they can figure out. They can go to a podcast, reach out to people in their network, outside their network, and really hone in on that and start to differentiate. To you earlier,
I completely agree. I have two thoughts, if I may. One is on I cannot believe I just blanked. So let me start with my second thought. Maybe I'll come back first. So you mentioned like networking, reaching out to people. You know, I have attended networking events. This is how we met. We met at a networking event, right?
Right.
I used to think networking events were like, cringe, eye roll. I don't want to do it. No, actually, I have a lot of respect for them now because you meet interesting people like this. I've been approached by people at networking events who have asked for mentorship. I've been approached online by people at my university who reach out and see my LinkedIn and approach me about mentorship. I think that is such a strong, it's underutilized, and I think it's really strong. You know, building a professional network. On my website, I publish a lot of these videos on leadership skills, and one of them that I recently published was mapping your developmental network. And it's all on how you build a network of people to support your growth, to support personal and professional growth. So I think it's really underutilized.
Speaking of networking, I just want to shout out that we're going to have a meetup on September 28th in Irvine, Orange County. Please come in. It's a free event. It's focused around software engineering, obviously. And we're going to do also networking, specifically networking, where you can, if you're looking for a job or you're just looking or you want to get connection, that's the place to start joining us.
It's a fantastic space we're having it. Unfortunately, I'll be out of town. I won't be there, but I'm looking forward to what comes out of it. Keep me posted.
Sure. Absolutely. Yep.
And the other, I think this is a good segue into, Jeff, do you want to talk a little bit about, because I think what you're, and I think this is a very interesting 0 to 1 journey for you, are things that you're starting to do with, the way I look at it is giving back to the community, right? I've seen your videos on YouTube. You shared those. They have been really informative for me personally. But you want to talk a little bit about that? You want to tell folks a little bit about how to reach?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much. So I have a website. It's jeffstrauss.net because .com was taken, and some guy in New York, not even a Jeff, but that's just beside the point. It's jeffstrauss.net. I'm not bitter about it. And on that website, I have links to my social, and I have I publish videos and on a couple of different topics. So one is on specific traits, skills, or talents or abilities of leadership, right? So different leadership competencies like professional networking, building your developmental network. I'm working on one right now that I'm going to release as a multi-part series because it's enormous. It's everything to do with teams. We spoke a little bit about that before. How high-performance teams work, how to manage high-performance teams, how to extract more performance out of teams that you may not be performing the way you want. It's like a huge, essentially what I'm trying to think about it as is it'll be the one-stop shop to go for anything you need to know about teams in an organization. So I do stuff like that, and I post that on my website, and I post it on YouTube as well. And I have written content as well, sort of short or medium form written content on my Substack, which is also linked to my website, jeffstrauss.net. I have Strauss on Leadership, my Instagram, which is very rudimentary right now, but everything I post goes there. So I do that, and then I do these sort of very high level, not even really book reviews, but they're sort of book conversations. I choose a book that had some impact on me in some way. I briefly describe the book. I briefly describe why it had an impact on me, and then I share a personal anecdote or two that relates to that impact.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and so then I publish those as well.
Yeah, you want to maybe putting you on the spot here, maybe some public external accountability here. I love it that you're starting to the book series. That sounds really, really,
thank you,
really, really interesting. Anything interesting you want to share that might be coming up that we should be on the lookout for the next month or two?
For book wise?
Yeah.
So like what I'm reading now, for example? Yeah. Okay. So I'm reading. I'm about to read a book from actually a former coworker of mine, Russ Laraway. It's a well-known book now in like the management leadership space. I think it's called When They Win, We Win, I believe is the title of the book. I might be butchering that title. And Russ, if you're watching, I'm so very sorry. But Russ was a colleague of mine at Twitter. And I was really keen to read his book because I know him as a person, and he was fantastic. We used to work out together at the Twitter gym. And he's a really great person, great leader. And eventually what I'd like to turn this into are interviews with the authors of these books. And I'd love to just pick their brains and just, I release all my content for free. I don't anticipate ever charging for anything. But I would love to have conversations with these authors of these books that I've reviewed, because their experience is even if the experience isn't necessarily unique per se, their perspectives are very unique. And I'd love to like pick their brains of these books that have had an impact on me in some way.
Yeah, and I think on the like tech leadership front, there's been such amazing work done, and I want to say like even the past couple of years, but definitely past 5 years. I remember just there wasn't that much specific to like tech leadership, whether it was a tech leadership focused book or not. Like that perspective, has been great. Couple of very few different books, and just more and more stuff keeps coming out, and I love it.
Yeah, I love it too. I do have a critique about leadership books. I'll say it. Okay. I think a lot of leadership books that come out there's a lot of very interesting anecdotes that are personal to the author, but the concepts I find can be applied across the board. And a lot of these concepts are not like novel concepts. You don't find a lot of books like that very often. One of the reasons I sort of mentioned this when I talked about my interviewing style, which is trying to tease out these hidden gems from people. And if anybody is interested in that, I actually have a presentation that I gave at the Linux Foundation a few years ago. I flew up to Seattle and talked about creating inclusive, diverse, and equitable interview panels. And in that presentation, which is on my website, I talk a little bit about the strategies and techniques that I use to tease this information out. But I try to do the same thing with books. I try to, I'll read any management book. For example, I'll give an example, right? I love the military books, right?
Yeah.
Thank God in our line of work, I hope it's not life and death for anybody. Because in these books, it's life and death for these people, right? And I love reading the anecdotes, but the underlying foundation of these books is all very similar. It's about the strength of communication, the strength of planning, right? The strength of sort of like, again, these emotionally intelligent traits of these individuals who are going and having each other's back. One trait of a high performing team is other teammates are actively involved in the success of other teammates. Right? They're not sort of competing against each other or working in a silo. They're actually like, I have your best interest at heart, your best interest, like, let's work together to do this. And so you see a lot of that, right? But that's very clear in those types of books. In other types of books, like I reviewed a book called Endurance, which is also a really well-known book. It's about a ship expedition, a boating expedition. I teased out very interesting information on building a team from that. So I like to read these books as I try to find these sort of like analogies to my regular life and tease those out, and then create, I think this is the angle I want to pursue, is to create applicable steps, like actionable, practical steps that people can employ, rather than being sort of like ethereal and pie in the sky. Like, how do you bring that down to life and then create, here are the 5 steps that you can use to actually enact some of this. That's what I really like doing.
This is very interesting, your passion, and it makes sense totally because you're in a leadership. Tell me what drives you to do this. Was it your previous, how your previous experience was impacted? Like maybe some examples. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I thank you for the question. one of the things that I value very much, I'm not really sure why. I think I have credit maybe my parents for some of this.
Yeah.
I really love to see other people succeed. I think of myself as a catalyst for other people's success. If I see people zoom by me in their careers, I'm like, and if I had a hand in that, I feel just as good as they must feel about being there. You know what I mean? That's really important to me. So I think a lot of my passion comes from the fact that I want to see other people succeed. It makes me feel good. For a time, so I worked at this high school. I was a systems administrator there, and I taught a computer science class. I taught Python for juniors and seniors. And one of the things that I absolutely loved about that job was seeing the aha moments, as they're called, right? Mm-hmm. For students who were like, I don't understand this concept. And then we would talk through it, practical examples, here's how it works. And then to see like the light bulb go off, that's like a priceless moment. And I love seeing that even with teams that I manage now. I love having, even if their technical skill, and, you know, they say Andy Grove in his book, High Output Management, the late Andy Grove, he said this in that book. He goes, the higher up, it's a paraphrase, the more you ascend the leadership chain in an organization, the more obsolete you become. And what he meant by that was you're no longer at the front line. You know what I mean? So like the more I move up in the hierarchy, the less technical I become.
All right.
And my teams are much more technical than I am.
Yeah.
And so even if that's the case, I still want to be able to find ways to unblock them, to help them have like realizations or aha moments, even if they're not technical. Now I get to work on like the leadership and the people aspect and that challenge of helping them achieve. And that's what really energizes me.
Yeah, it's an awesome, I think, as people who may be listening who want to get into leadership, I definitely, one thing I would, and a lot of books these days highlight that, and, you know, but what's really, really interesting there is like, you know, especially in tech, like in IT and software, what happens is you're performing well at your role, and then, you know, and then somebody comes in, well, you should be a lead, you should be a manager, right? That's a lot of that path, right?
Yeah.
And it's also filled with bias. We can, you know, there's a lot of gender bias, that approach. The issue becomes because what you've been rewarded for so far is your personal performance.
Yeah.
And suddenly what not everybody does enough job to tell you is like, now your success is basically your team's success.
100%.
How do you pull back from people saying, hey, Jeff, awesome job, to like really switch your mind into like, Jeff, your team killed it. They don't even say Jeff anymore.
Yeah.
And switching that mindset early on,
yeah,
I think is really important for your success, early success, but for your long-term success is even, you know, to your point, is also so important because that becomes the most rewarding part of your job. Obviously, you know, helping your business grow, like you have a lot of influence. Those are things there as well. But I would say like day to day, that's like the most rewarding when you see people zoom by you. You see people doing well, and you see maybe they're transitioning to other roles. Totally agree.
Yeah, I feel about your point about switching your mindset from individual recognition to recognition for your team. I totally agree. You know, one of my biggest critiques about how people are moved into leadership positions is because they're moved from an IC role into a leadership role because they excelled at that IC role. Because you're the most technical on your team, so you should be the lead on your team. I think that is the wrong approach. I think there are some people who are able to make that switch, right? Who have the chops right out of the gate to be able to do that. But quite honestly, leadership and management, I subtly differentiate the two in some circumstances, but leadership and management is a skill. It is a learned skill. You cannot move from like being the most technical on your team and being an IC to all of a sudden managing the team and having all of the skills and abilities and competencies necessary for managing that team. And I found that to be, that's like a hard won lesson that I had to learn, right? And I have always had that mentality though, like I mentioned before, where I want to see other people succeed. So I think one of the reasons why I'm passionate about people management is because I just have that bone in my body, right?
Yeah.
But some people don't. And if they want to be people leaders, you have to learn the skill. And what I'm trying to do in my own work on leadership and the stuff that I publish is, hey, here are some of the things that you can use to actually develop that skill so that you can be a competent people manager, because the skill sets are different and you can't just move from one to the other and think that it's going to be okay, because it's a completely different role. It's a completely different job. And quite frankly, you're absolutely right. You have to get out of the mentality where you're receiving individual accolades for your contributions. I'll go back to that Andy Grove book real quick, High Output Management. And in that book, he writes, the output of a manager is equivalent to the output of his team. And I think that is true. Yeah.
Going back, tell your transition from IC to the management position. Like, how's this path work?
Yeah. So I was working at Twitter at the time, and like I said, I was sort of like the highest point escalation for some of this work that I was doing there. And at the time, I was looking for another role. There were a lot of reasons why that was. I loved working at Twitter. It was a great, it's the company formerly known as Twitter. Sorry, everybody.
Oh, yeah.
So sorry.
Not anymore.
Yeah, not anymore. See, this was a different company back then.
Yeah.
And it was great. I worked under an awesome CEO. Dick Costello was amazing. I worked with amazing colleagues and coworkers. This was a great place to work. But I was looking for a bit of a change, and I had moved from LA to San Francisco, and I was thinking about coming back down to LA. And actually, truth be told, the way it worked was I received a call. I think somebody I'm not exactly sure how. I was active in a couple of communities. I think this goes back to the importance of professional networking. Mm-hmm. I was active in a couple of online communities. And I think through that, a company down here in LA, it's no longer here, they were called Fullscreen. And I think they got bought out by AT&T a few years back. They were looking for a manager for their IT and sort of like a couple of other teams. And they contacted me, and I sort of talked to them about what my leadership strategy was on the team that I was on, the client engineering team at Twitter. And I think that's how the transition officially happened by title. Mm-hmm. Was this company reached out to me and said, okay, we want a manager for this team. Yeah. Whereas I was just a senior client engineer.
But in your resume, it was not a manager,
no,
right?
Not a manager, senior client engineer.
Yep. Which is very unique. I think I think your experience is there's inspiration to be taken there, but that's like less likely, right? Most of the this is you hear often, right? Most of the opportunities come within the company. Yeah. You find opportunities within the company to demonstrate and do the role change. That is very interesting. So you were you were able to go from at least the title, you had some lead responsibility at the title, NIC title, to a management title.
Correct.
By switching jobs,
which is actually one of the most common ways to get the next title. Yeah. As a matter of fact, yes. Although I think we would all wish that we could have those, the opportunities internally. Sometimes, like if you're at a big company, it's a big moving machine. Sometimes it's very difficult to advance in those types of environments. And so actually one of the most common ways to advance in a career is to switch jobs and find the next position. I will tell you one quick story. So this happened to me at one of my jobs. It actually happened to me at Tinder. Mm-hmm. So I was at Tinder for almost 4 years, and I worked under, when I first got there, an amazing manager. His name is James Kim, and he was awesome. And I learned a lot from him. We had actually gone to high school together. I didn't even know that. He recognized me from our high school yearbook.
Oh, wow.
And one day he brought the yearbook to the office. He said, here's you. And I was like, oh, I thought they burned all of these. But I hope they burned them. They didn't. He had one. So he was awesome. And I'll tell you a quick story about the titling. Right? Yeah. So when I got to Tinder, this was about 10 months after Fullscreen, because I left Fullscreen. Tinder, I can't remember how Tinder called me, but we got in touch somehow. And so I was there in about, I would say maybe like a year, some odd months in. At the time, I was the highest point of escalation in the technical role. There was nobody above me in IT. I reported directly to, I think there was maybe an interim period where I reported directly to the CEO for a minute, or maybe it was HR. There were some people. But we were essentially, my team was autonomous. We didn't really answer to anybody. We did whatever we wanted. There was a lot of trust that was built. So we were able to do what we wanted to do, and we did a good job. And so there was a lot of that trust built in. James came to me and said, it was around promotion time, and he wanted to give me a promotion. He wanted to promote me to director. I'll never forget this, and I'll never make the same mistake again. He wanted to promote me to director, and I said, because I thought I was being humble, which I think I was, but maybe it was incorrectly placed. I said, I don't think I'm ready for a director position, so I don't want to accept the title. Looking back on it, wrong move. If somebody offers you the director title, take it. Let me just tell you, everybody, that now. Take it, and you will figure it out, right? Like most of the things you probably know now, you probably learned at a job, so you can figure it out on the job. But I said no, so I became a senior manager, and I was stuck in that senior manager role, and not even despite the fact that a couple of years later, I had asked for a director title. I said, I'm doing a director job. I've built this team. We've supported the company's growth, right? I wasn't able to get that title, and eventually I left. And that's why I left the company, was to move on to somewhere else. So I've had the experience where I've tried to move within a company, and it was very difficult to do that. And so, you left and got the other opportunity elsewhere.
Yeah, I think it's very, very interesting because my experience has been different.
Really?
I've been able to move up in titles within the company. I think part of it is definitely companies at the time were growth. They weren't big. I used to work at Yahoo. I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
But Chow Now, Entertainment Partners, companies I've worked at before, it was within the company moving up and changing titles. In fact, mine was a reverse. When I moved from Entertainment Partners to Chow Now, I took a lesser title because at one point in time at Entertainment Partners, I had just a lot of people within my org reporting to it, and I was director. Whole other story, But when I moved to Chow Now, I was moving from a very, very big organization to now taking over, I think at the time it was 4 or 5 people. And all of my peers as well were kind of in that growth phase. So they all had manager titles. So I took a manager title, and just got to work, watching a lot of people, watching a lot of people grow. And this year, my title got changed to director. So it's kind of interesting. That contrast is interesting. That all goes to show there is no one golden path. You have to make it work for you.
Yeah.
And in the end, this is my philosophy. You're only in competition with yourself. But yeah, that's a very, very, very good advice. Yeah. Don't turn. And I think this is where I've helped people through their career as well, where somebody's been like, oh no, I'm not sure I want that. Either I'm your mentor or your manager. I'm telling you, you're ready. Listen.
Yeah.
Listen to that person. Don't let, we all have that, right? Because that zero mentality is really important. But at the same time, you have to be open up to your managers, to your mentors, and let them push you into
take the challenge.
Comfortable challenges. Yeah.
Take challenge.
May I mention 2 things?
Yeah.
And I don't want to run up on time, but I remember what I thought of before when you mentioned it. You mentioned something about people have to know what they want to do in their career, like where they want to go. I think that's a really important concept. It's one of the reasons why in my one-on-ones, whenever I'm on a new team, and I ask I actually ask my teammates this on a regular basis when I do my one-on-ones with them, is in the beginning, what's your 1, 3, 5-year plan? Where do you see yourself in the short term, medium term, and long term? And I've gotten responses like, I don't really know. I never really thought about it. I'm like, okay, well, now your homework is think about it. Like, where do you want to go? Right? Because I don't want you floating around. Like, even if you don't see your future here, I want to at least get you the skills and the techniques and the abilities to move to where you want to go. So first, figure out where you want to go. The other thing is about the sort of, again, the titling and the experience thing that we were just talking about is, one thing that I found very valuable is you're absolutely right. You have to do what you need to do for yourself. There isn't like a roadmap to follow. It's based on what you want to do yourself. One thing that I found very interesting was after I left Tinder, I went to Netflix, where I also took a lesser title. I went from senior manager to manager.
Yeah.
But I went from a company that was around, I don't know, 500 some odd people to a company that was 10,000 people, right? And so the responsibilities and the type of work that you have to do, the type of management, the challenges, the interpersonal challenges, the communication challenges, the coordination challenges, the technical challenges are on just it's a different planet, right? It's a different planet. And so I decided to make that switch despite the lesser title after evaluating some of those variables. And I think that's really important as well. I would say not just focus on the title, but focus on the environment that you're moving into as well, because it might be the thing to get you to the, short-term, lack of a better word, short-term pain for long-term gain, right?
Yes.
That's it.
It's totally relate to that because, other than the commute.
Yeah.
Because I lived in Burbank at the time, entertainment partners was at the same time. Chow Now was all the way in Playa Vista. Other than the commute, I was like, yeah, this is the areas where I want to see growth. I love my time here at entertainment partners and be able to really look at it big picture and look beyond certain, like the short-term pain and long-term gain. Being able to overlook that is like really, really powerful. I mean, everything is, you don't know what's going to happen in the future, but making the best decision with the information you have is the best you can do. And sometimes that may look to others like it's a step back.
Yeah.
But you know where you're headed.
Yeah.
You know where you're headed. And, and that long-term gain comes from that kind of long-term thinking.
Yeah, it's true. It's funny. I remember when I moved from full screen to Tinder, I let my mom has been a big sort of like business influence in my life. My mom owned her own business for a long time. She has a very successful startup.
Yeah.
She had a reality show about herself. Now the world knows. I was against it, but it happened and it's great. But she's been very, very successful. And I remember I went from full screen to Tinder. And at the time, Tinder was very well known. Right? Everybody knew Tinder.
Right.
Because they invented the swipe right.
Yeah.
And that became like it became part of the lexicon, right? People were like, oh, I swipe right on that. Oh, that's a coffee. Great coffee. I swipe right on that coffee. Very well-known company. Then I moved from there to Netflix, right? Even more well-known as a company. Then I moved from there to Snap. Oh, another well-known company, right? Then I moved from Snap to Docker. And Docker is like well-known in our field.
Yeah.
But my mom has no idea what Docker is. You know what I mean? And just to your point, you have to know what your next move is and do the best for you. Like I know people who are logo chasers, right? And I know people who are unhappy in their jobs at big companies, but they want to stay there because of the notoriety of being at that company, despite the fact that that company is not doing anything, nor are they doing anything to, to develop themselves. They're just sort of like stuck in their place. And I think it would behoove them to at least explore other opportunities, even at lesser known places where they can professionally develop and really blossom into like who they are and like express their own capabilities and values and virtues and their own skills.
That's awesome. Jeff, I read the comments like people who was working with you, amazing, great person, great leader, want to work with. I bet like right now, a lot of people who's looking, I want to work under Jeff. Can you hire me?
That's very kind. Thank you.
Yeah. What is your next 0 to 1 thing?
I think my next 0 to 1 thing is something like this, right? I talked a little bit about the interviews that I want to do with authors. I have no idea I have a great microphone. It's on a stand on my desk and I just stare at it every day. And I'm like, I bought one of those, like the little podcast recorders, and I've used it once as a test. And I really want to do that. I was commenting as we started this. I was like, oh, this is how it all comes together. So we're sitting here and I see the mics and the lights and I'm like the camera. I'm like, oh, okay, this is how it's done. So this is my next sort of 0 to 1 thing is I really want to explore that. Yeah.
Sure.
Very kind of Chow Now to let us use this space. I love doing it here in person. We did it we actually started in the pandemic, doing it virtually, and this is this feels so much more just easier connection wise. If anybody can hear construction, there's construction going on today. I don't think the mics can pick it up. We can hear it, but just thankful for Chow Now letting us use this.
Thank you, Chow Now.
Yeah, thank you, Chow Now.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very amazing office, like super Anyway, folks, we covered a lot today. Please join us also for career advice and career resume reviews, mock interviews in our platform Crashing Interview. Subscribe to our newsletter 021. Add us on the LinkedIn at Jeffrey on LinkedIn. We'll post all links in the description down below. So, and we'll see you next Saturday though. We're gonna have another guest. She is a director in QA space. Also very interesting story. So join us next Saturday as well. Thank you very much for listening to us and staying with us this Saturday morning. And I'll see you folks next Saturday. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.